Ik wil de regie vragen voor deze bijzondere gast die zo direct gaat komen, all the way from England, om het introductiefilmpje te starten, AUB.
It's all really rather exciting, isn't it? It's referendum season, and the referendum is coming on the 6th of April in the Netherlands.
As the Dutch Prime Minister, is you didn't mention the fact that 427,000 of your own citizens called a referendum for the 6th of April and encouraged the rest of the country to join in.
You have the charisma of a damp rag and the appearance of a low-grade bank clerk.
Mr. Juncker here says that there'll be a continental crisis if the Dutch vote no. Well, I'll drink to that, is all I can say.
Ja, als we iemand hebben waar we vuurwerk aan verwachten. We are very honored, a gifted speaker, the leader of the UKIP party. Give him a warm applause and welcome Mr. Nigel Farage. Oh, Nigel. Take the honor. Mr. Farage, we are excited that you are here. But I first have a couple of questions.
Oh dear.
Yes, yes. I'm known for my questions. You survived a plane crash.
I did, yeah. It happened about a month after the Van Rompuy speech. Now, I'm not necessarily a conspiracy theorist, but there could be a connection. Who knows?
Well, but can you say something how what happened? And what did it do to you? Because if you see the death in your eyes, do you change?
I was, it was a UKIP event. We were towing a banner election day, and the idea was to say, you know, vote for your country, vote UKIP. And I thought it would be a spectacularly good idea to get in the cockpit with the pilot and have the whole thing photographed. And it all went disastrously wrong.
Yes, so we read.
When the banner wrapped round my tail. And yeah, we knew for about 5 minutes that we were going to crash. And I can tell you, it's a pretty sobering experience. And I sat there, and for one of the first and only times in my life, I was completely and utterly silent. There was.
Hold on, I don't believe this.
Well, okay. But I mean, what could one do? What could one say?
I think you need a new microphone. Yes.
Is that? Hello. Is that any better? Is that clearer? Good. Yes, I know. I went completely silent because I thought, well, whatever I say, whatever I do, you know, I reasoned the pilot didn't want to die any more than I did. So I just sat there in silence. And when that ground hurtles up towards you, yeah, I was pretty fatalistic about it. I kind of thought, this is it.
This is it.
This is it. It's all over. Let's hope it's all over quickly.
Have you changed?
Have I changed? Well, I should have changed, but let me tell you how little I changed. I was trapped upside down in this thing and badly smashed.
Shouting out for Rompuy, what you've done to me?
Yeah, you bastard.
You bastard.
Anyway, my press officer came to the aeroplane, ran across the field to the aeroplane, and he said, Nigel, are you all right? With which I replied with a fairly good volley of Anglo-Saxon, that could you remove me as quickly as possible from this structure? So he undid the straps, and I managed to sort of get myself up. I just wanted to get away as quickly as I could. And I was, you know, I was bleeding, and I was broken, and covered in fuel, which was the scariest bit. And I was all smashed up, and I got about 25 yards away, and I said, Duncan, I said, light us one of those, will you? I had one drag and threw it down. I felt sick. No, I don't think it has changed me at all. I just think of myself as being... I survived a big car crash back in the 1980s.
I've read that also, yes.
When I was quite badly beaten up. So I've just been incredibly lucky to get through these experiences. And I don't know, perhaps it all happens for a reason. Perhaps I've got a job to do. And perhaps the culmination of 20 years' work on June the 23rd in the United Kingdom is going to be a referendum in which I think we're probably going to vote for Brexit.
Yes, well, let's see about that. Let's see about that. But you've been a coming man in England. I mean, you are the force against basically the EU. Has it changed your private life? Because you're always on the road. You are under pressure sometimes, you have protection, you are lived by other people. How did it affect your private life?
Well, it makes going down the pub for a few pints a bit more difficult than it used to be.
Yes.
No, I mean, there isn't much of a private life doing a job like this. It's part of the price that you pay. And so anybody in the room who's thinking about a career in politics, my advice to you is think again, because, a lot of it's great fun, a lot of it's very important, but you do lose, hobbies, family, time.
Yeah.
That's the downside.
Do you know why I am against Brexit, me as a person?
You're against Brexit?
Yes.
I've come to the wrong place.
Yes. I don't want to miss the English. I suppose the British go away from the EU. No, I can't. Anyway, I'll give you the microphone. The audience is yours. I wish you all the luck in the world, but you don't need it because you're a gifted speaker. Thank you very much. Nigel Farage, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, what an amazing event, and it really is great to be here and to come to a political event, a political rally, at which you stopped for a drinks break. I was very impressed with that, Mr. Chairman, I must say. And it's a great time to be here in the Netherlands. I'm told that your Prime Minister, who is enjoying the rotating 6 months presidency of the European Union, I'm told that he's absolutely thrilled that I'm in town today. And I'm expecting a dinner invitation as soon as I leave this platform. It's rather a fun thought, isn't it? That it's during the Dutch presidency that we have a referendum here on Wednesday, and before the end of the term, a Brexit referendum. And I just hope we can make Mr. Rutte's presidency of this European Union the most historic since the Treaty of Rome. Now, I'm here today above all to say a massive, a mega congratulations to that group of young bloggers, and my Dutch isn't terribly good. Is it called GeenPeil or something like that, isn't it? Well, you know what I mean anyway. I've traveled all over the world and visited political parties and visited all sorts of traditional media groups and new media groups, and my experience of people who are bloggers is that they're all terribly clever, but they're all geeks, basically. And they're hopelessly impractical, and they never actually make anything really happen. Well, what these guys have done is to prove that clever, young, motivated, politically entrepreneurial people can make things happen, and I think to have got 427,000 validated signatures to put off this referendum is a fantastic achievement, and I pay tribute to you. Now, that's the nice thing I'm going to say. The bad news, guys, is I will probably be poaching some of your best members of staff because it is an amazing achievement. So let's celebrate that. Let's celebrate this outbreak of democracy that has happened in this country, and let's hope that it spreads like a rash, like a disease across the rest of Europe, because everybody in this union deserves the right to have a say on the direction of the European Union. And I also want to say that I want people to use this opportunity to go out and vote on Wednesday. Whichever way they vote, getting people engaged, getting people voting, particularly young people, is really, really important. And I'm absolutely certain that this exercise that has happened here, and indeed has been going on in Switzerland for many, many years, I believe that direct democracy is the way forward for the West. We no longer trust our career politicians. We no longer trust people who go straight from university into research offices, become members of parliament at 27 years old, who look the same, think the same, support the same policies, marry each other's sisters. We've had enough of it. And we need a politics that reflects the way the people in a democracy feel. So I'm all for direct democracy, and I think what you're doing here is setting a very important precedent, I hope, for many other, what used to be democratic nations across the West. So more direct democracy must be a cry that comes out from Wednesday. Now, it's important, I think, given that I'm a foreigner, that I don't come along here and tell you how you should vote. It's not for me to tell you how you should vote. No, I'm very neutral on this European Union question. Well, look, it's very simple. If you think that most of the laws of your land should be proposed by an unelected bunch of old men based in the European Commission, then you're welcome to it. Vote yes, by all means. But if you vote no, that will have, I hope and believe, some real consequences. You see, it should have had consequences back in 2005. It should have done. Now, I remember that referendum very, very well. I was in Paris on the night of the French referendum when they said no to the European Constitution. And I was in Brussels on the night that you voted no to the EU Constitution. In fact, I was in the members' bar of the European Parliament when the vote came through with about 80 or 90 Eurosceptic MEPs and staff that worked in the Parliament. And we waited for the result, and up it came. 61% had said no. And I thought, well, it's simple. The French have killed the Constitution. The Dutch have now buried the Constitution. We have actually struck a blow against the centralization of Europe, against the direction of this whole project. For about 10 minutes, as the corks popped out of the bottles, I actually thought we changed the whole direction of this project. And I remember being very happy. And at that moment, 10 minutes on, a German socialist MEP called Joe Leinen, and Joe Leinen had been one of the co-authors of that constitution, and Joe Leinen was walking down past us, heading off, I guess, to do a press interview. And I walked over to him, as modestly as I could in the circumstances, and said, would you like to share a glass of champagne with us to celebrate this wonderful result that we'd had in the Netherlands tonight? And his eyes looked straight through me. And he said, and I've never forgotten it, and I never will, he said, you may have your little victory party tonight. We have 50 different ways to win. And it just, everything just drained out of me. That brief 10 minutes of elation, of thinking we changed this whole thing, drained out of me. And what did they do? Within a few weeks, they'd rebrand. Oh, they told us they'd get rid of the flag and the anthem, remember? Fancy what? They were lying, weren't they? They were lying. The flag's still there, and the anthem's still there. They play that wretched anthem in the European Parliament, and they get upset when I turn my back on them. They said they'd do that, they didn't. They rebranded it as the Lisbon Treaty, and the former Italian Prime Minister D'Amato boasted. He said the great thing about calling it the Lisbon Treaty and not the Constitution is we won't need to have referendums. How about that? How is that for sheer political cynicism? Well, of course, one country did have to have a referendum because it's in their constitution. And the Irish had a referendum, and guess how they voted? They voted no and were forced to vote again. And they'd done the same 15 years earlier over the Treaty of Nice, and indeed we'd seen the Danes back in 1992 rejecting the Maastricht Treaty and being told by the then German Chancellor that as a little country they got it wrong and they would have to vote again. And ladies and gentlemen, that is the real story of this European project. It is an idea that has been dreamed up by the elites. It is an idea that is backed by big banks, big business, and big politics. It is an unholy trinity who have decided how we should live our lives in the future. And the only way we are going to beat them is to stand up and revolt against the establishment and defeat them in referendum after referendum. Now, I hope I put across my position there in as neutral a terms as I possibly could. Because you wouldn't want somebody from overseas coming here telling you what to do, would you? So the opinion polls say that on a relatively healthy turnout, the opinion polls say there is going to be a no vote of similar proportions to the one that we saw in this country in 2005. I wonder whether your government will listen. I wonder whether the European Commission will listen. Well, you will all hope. You will all hope. Maybe for as long as 10 minutes, who's to say? 15. 50. Any advance on 15? I don't know. Don't be silly, 20 minutes, really. You've got to get a better quality of audience than this, Mr. Chairman, really. I suspect that they will ignore you, which is even more reason to vote no. Because if they do ignore you, all that happens is the argument moves on. And the argument that there's no point in going on voting for the same traditional parties who ignore your will, that will grow too. That will grow too. It has to. And I'm pleased to see that in this campaign, there are parties in this country on the right of politics and parties on the left of politics campaigning for a no vote. This question about whether we live as nation-state democracies, this question about whether we're the masters of our own destiny, this question about whether we are nation-states and free and independent. This is not about whether you are left or right. It's about right and wrong. That's what it's about. But there may just be, if of course there was to be a no vote, there may just be another knock-on consequence of perhaps even greater significance. If in the course of the next 3 months your vote is the hors d'oeuvre, then our vote is the main course. Our vote really is the main course. And too often over the years, the so-called liberal, who are actually highly illiberal, but never mind, the so-called liberal elite say to the Eurosceptics in my country, look, stop being so silly. Stop behaving like islanders. Stop being backward. Don't you understand that on the other side of the North Sea, everybody thinks that the European project is completely and utterly wonderful? I'm beginning to understand that. But that's what they say. And actually, the result of a no vote in this referendum will send a big message to the British electorate that we are not alone in thinking something has fundamentally gone wrong in the direction of the European Union and the freedom and self-government of our country. A no vote in this referendum. A referendum that they've done their best to ignore, apart from Mr. Juncker's little slip. They may have got him after lunch, I don't know. It's the one thing Juncker and I got in common, actually. We like lunch. They may have got him after, but you know, he admitted that it would be a disaster. There would be a disaster if there was a no vote here on Wednesday. Well, I find that tremendously exciting, because I think this project is a disaster. I think this project is based on a whole series of untruths that have been told to us for decades. And the one referendum in which I can tell you that I am going to tell the electorate where I stand is the British referendum on June the 23rd. And I shall be buoyed up, I believe, on Wednesday night by the result that comes from this country. I believe in Brexit. I believe the United Kingdom should be an independent, self-governing democracy. I want us to trade with Europe. I want us to cooperate with Europe. I want us to be good next-door neighbours. I want us to be friends. I want us to have reciprocity. You know, we don't need a European Commission to have an Erasmus scheme, to have exchanges of students. We can agree where it suits us, common minimum business standards. There are many things that we can do. But I've believed in Brexit now for nearly a quarter of a century. And I decided back in 1993, as somebody who'd been in business before, that's right, I had a proper job, how about that? I had a proper job trading in base metals, copper, aluminium, lead, tin, zinc, and nickel. And I should have thought 90% of it was shipped through Rotterdam. So I've done my bit for your economy as well, all right? Well, it's true, nowhere else is any good, really. Rotterdam is actually very, very good at what it does. So I spent my years working in the commodities business, but I was so enraged by the direction my country was going in that I thought I had to get involved. So I first stood for election back in 1993, and to say that my views were considered to be fringe and extreme would be a mild understatement. And in my first election, I just managed to beat the leader, the late great leader of the official monster raving loony party. I just beat him and didn't quite come last. And I wondered through the 1990s and through the early noughties whether perhaps I was going to become the English patron saint of lost causes. Because simply people just didn't seem to care. But I kept on plugging away, and in the European elections of 2014, the party that I lead topped the polls and came first across the United Kingdom. It wasn't a bad job, was it really? It took a long time. And Brexit has now become so mainstream that 6 members of David Cameron's cabinet, he's pretty cheesed off, I got to tell you. 6 members of Cameron's cabinet have come for Brexit. 140 Conservative backbenchers are campaigning for Brexit. And there are increasingly now some voices from the Labour Party and the trade union movement. Even the Communist Party of Great Britain are campaigning for Brexit. I never thought I'd be on the same side as them, I have to tell you. I can't accurately predict what the result is going to be, but what I've heard and what I've seen from the establishment so far in this campaign is a whole host of fear and scare stories, telling us that if we're not part of this union, nobody will trade with us. Well, when I look on the streets of London, I see quite a lot of Audis, BMWs, Mercedes, and for those that will still admit to it, Volkswagens as well. And when I look in the pubs and the clubs and the restaurants of Britain, I see quite a lot of champagne and wine. And actually, the reason why, in economic terms, Brexit does work for my country is we now trade with all of you at a massive, massive deficit every single year. So we are the right country to have this referendum first. We're the one country where cold economic logic says we don't need to be in a European political project in order to buy and sell goods from each other. But I do think, even though I personally would wish the arguments for democracy to be at the fore, I suspect the issue that will decide whether the United Kingdom decides to stay or leave will be the issue of open borders, unlimited immigration, and an increasing security threat. And frankly, look around the world. There are 200 countries around the world that control their borders. 200 countries that if you want to go and settle there, you have to pass a series of tests. And generally what countries say is we want people who've got trades and skills. We want people without criminal records. We want people who are prepared to pay their own health insurance for the first few years they're in the country. And we want people not in unlimited numbers, but in sensible, limited numbers. And none of us can now do that as members of a European Union with a population of 508 million citizens, and 10 of those countries are former communist countries that are, that are far, far poorer than any of us are in the north of Europe. So getting back sensible immigration controls, I think, makes sense. And whilst you may be debating, or voting, I should say, on this Ukrainian deal, there's another potential enlargement that I think is even madder. Did someone say Turkey at the back there? 10 out of 10. 10 out of 10. Isn't it amazing? So we have this crisis. Juncker sends out a message last year that the EU common asylum policy is coming into place. Chancellor Merkel then gave a speech last summer, which I think was the worst political misjudgment we've seen in Europe since 1945. And now Turkey is negotiating with the European Union. They're not doing badly, are they? So far, we've agreed to give them 6 billion euros. So far, for every one non-qualifying refugee that we send back to Turkey, they will send us someone that they think is a qualifying refugee. And from later on in this year, 77 million Turks will have visa-free access to the Schengen zone. Yeah, that means you guys. And in theory, they can only stay for 90 days. But in practice, large numbers will disappear or, of course, claim family reunion. And on top of that, Chancellor Merkel and the others have said they're going to fast-track Turkish membership of the European Union. Do you know something? We've just finished David Cameron's renegotiation of Britain's membership of the European Union. I wish he'd asked the Turks to negotiate for us, because they've done a spectacular deal. And I suspect the common sense of the British people will come through here. Given that the boss of Europol now says that as many as 5,000 jihadi fighters have come back into Europe, posing as migrants through the Greek islands, we face not just a threat to our wages of our average workers going down, not just a threat to our National Health Service, which simply, and I mean this genuinely, cannot cope with the increase in numbers in our country, not just a threat to our primary school system, where we simply haven't got enough places, not just a threat to our culture and our way of life, by having communities who, if they come in too fast the numbers, segregate and don't integrate with the rest of society. But frankly, I fear that through open borders, through the EU's common asylum policy, we actually face a threat to our civilization through our misplaced compassion. And I believe it's on those grounds I think that the British people are going to vote for Brexit. I want to repeat what I said earlier. This is not about being anti-Europe. This is not about being anti-anybody. It's about being pro the people and the communities and the society and the culture in each and every one of our own unique, different, wonderful European countries. I want to live and work and go on holiday and do business in a Europe that is a fantastic Europe. This is the most fascinating continent on earth. You travel a relatively short distance, you find different cultures, different histories, different cheeses, different wines. We should all be saying, vive la différence. We want a Europe of different independent sovereign nation states that work together as closely and as happily as possible. Provided European nations are democratic, they will never go to war with each other. And the analysis that came in the 1950s, that it was the existence of nation state that had led to war, and that therefore we should abolish nation state, was wrong. It was wrong. It's the absence of democracy in nation state that leads to war, not if they're democratic. So I have a vision for Europe that in 10 years' time is back to being a Europe based very much more on the Europe we saw in Strasbourg in the late 1940s. The Council of Europe, where we as neighbours get together and discuss common issues. I mean, look, if you live in a street, you want to have a good local neighbourhood committee. You want together to deal with a problem of crime. You want together to deal with the problem of someone's playing loud music at 3 o'clock every morning. You want to get on with your neighbours, because if you do, your life is better. But you're all different families living in that street. And the idea that what you should do is knock through all the walls and have a joint bank account, frankly, doesn't make any sense. I hope very much that you do the right thing in this country on Wednesday, whatever that may be. And if you do, I tell you what, you'll give me a hell of a lot of assistance for June the 23rd, when something epoch-shattering is going to happen. Thank you.
Wow. What a hell of a speech. And I was, when you were saying the speech, I was thinking about something. What about people talk about the American dream, yeah? And here's a guy that's the great force behind the British Brexit, and is just a scrap metal dealer in the past. You're a scrap metal, like me. I'm a sewing machine dealer.
Yeah, I confess. I'm ordinary. I'm not a member of the ruling elite. Hurrah for that.
Hurrah for that one, hey! Mr. Farage, I hope the audience has some questions for you too. I have a couple of questions for you. Did you meet Mark Rutte in person?
Yes, I said hello very briefly, and he looked back at me and didn't smile.
You never ever had a discussion with him?
No, I haven't. I did once.
I find that strange.
No, I haven't done. I did once have lunch with Mrs. Merkel, and I mean, I have to say, sitting opposite me, she looked like she was sucking a lemon through lunch. She really wasn't very happy about the whole thing. The one European leader that I did have lunch with and get on with personally incredibly well, even though I disagreed completely with his politics, and that was President Sarkozy of France. And there were 7 of us having lunch.
Was his wife there?
And sadly, no. I was a bit cheesed off about that bit.
You saw that one coming.
And so there were 7 of us there, and there was Martin Schulz, he was there, leading the socialist group, charming man. And there was Danny Cohn-Bendit, of the riots of 1968, and he was there, and this sort of terribly PC group of people. And the reason we were there was that France was in the revolving presidency chair. And we had lunch in the Elysee, and they might have cut off the head of the monarchs, but they kept the cutlery, I can tell you. It was magnificent lunch, 1982 clarets being served, and all proper stuff. And then at the end of lunch, to the horror of most of those around the table...
The bill came.
No, there was no bill. No, we've been paying France for the last 30 years. There was no need for a bill. In fact, one of the reasons the French countryside is so lovely is British taxpayers subsidise it. And to the horror of the table, Sarkozy reached for a box of Romeo and Juliet cigars, and this was after the smoking ban had come in, and he and I sat there smoking these cigars to the absolute horror of the rest of the room. So I've got a bit of a soft spot for Sarkozy, but no, I haven't had the chance to meet your Prime Minister properly. But I look forward to his last address to the European Parliament, which will come just after the British referendum. Now that could be fun, couldn't it?
what I also like to hear, and I think the audience also, that we, with our referendum in 2 days, we could be a guideline to Britain. Because that's what you basically said.
Absolutely.
It could be, our referendum could be a signal
Yes.
for the British voter at the 23rd of June.
I'm absolutely convinced that if there was to be a strong no vote here, that would embolden many people in the United Kingdom into thinking it's not just us, we're not on our own, there is a genuine, very real problem here.
So
Yeah.
let's be noted that then, ladies and gentlemen. My last question to you. Suddenly the guy came out of nothing, I mean for us, is Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the Labour Party. And I know he's in favour of the EU. What is your opinion about him?
Well, Blair destroyed socialism, and you could argue that successive Conservative leaders destroyed conservatism, as they all rushed to the middle ground called social democracy. But then, if most of your laws are made in Brussels, it's very difficult to have different competing visions. You know, we currently have a massive steel crisis in the United Kingdom, and yet the British government is impotent. There is nothing we can do to stop the Chinese dumping steel at below the cost of production because we rely on the European Commission to do it for us. So Corbyn was a big reaction against the Labour Party giving up on many of its socialist ideas, and that effectively is why Corbyn won. The big disappointment is this. It is that for 40 years, Corbyn had been a supporter of Tony Benn. Tony Benn was a towering figure on the left of British politics, and Tony Benn, to his dying day, said we should never have joined the common market. We must leave the European Union because we cannot be a democratic, self-governing nation and part of it. And Corbyn has always been against our membership of this European political club, and yet he's allowed by the Labour Party to support unilateral nuclear disarmament, but if he was to support Brexit, his own MPs would get rid of him. And that shows you the extent to which the professional political class has literally been bought, purchased, paid for by this Brussels machine. So Corbyn, effectively in this referendum, is saying nothing and doing nothing.
That's why I ask.
But that could be to our advantage. Because if Labour voters aren't getting from their leader a strong message on the party line of voting to remain, I suspect a lot of them are going to stay at home. I hope so.
Ladies and gentlemen, do we have any questions for Nigel Farage? Sir, I come to you. In English, please.
Yes, hello, Mr. Farage. I have one question. You had a referendum a short time ago in the North. That was won by the people, the Scottish people, who want to stay with the English. What do you think? Is UKIP, is it strong enough to get this Scottish people out of the European community?
Well, you know, the recipe that Alex Salmon was selling, the label on the tin was independence. But independence to Alex Salmon meant divorcing from Westminster, but staying part of the European Union. So what he was selling actually, you know, the label on the tin wasn't really what the product was. So number one, there was huge confusion over what Salmon actually meant by that word. There was huge confusion as to what currency Scotland would use. But most of all, what really cost it for him was economics. He based the Scottish economic miracle on oil based at $113 a barrel. Well, it's been down to $27 a barrel in the meantime. And the economic case for Scotland separating from England but staying part of the EU did not make any sense at all. The difference here is that our economic case is that already we buy far more German cars and French wine that we sell in reverse. They need us more than we need them. So we've got economic logic on our side, but also we've got not just democracy, but we've got security and safety on our side. And surely common sense says to the British people that only by controlling your borders can you stop a number of these bad people from coming into your country. That's why we're going to win.
Thank you. Anybody else a question? Well, go to the back.
Hello. On the assumption that we will... Sorry, what's your name? Sorry. My name is Fons van der Wetering, and I have a question. Going off the assumption that we will reject the association treaty with Ukraine and Britain will step out of the European Union, do you think that will embolden other member states of the European Union to make moves towards going out, and if so, could you name any?
Well, if we have a Brexit, my guess is they'll all be gone by Christmas, yeah. Look, you know, I think what Brexit does, or what Brexit will do, is to start suggesting to people that maybe there's a different way, that maybe there is a different kind of Europe. And I think ultimately, you know, but this for you is much, much harder than it is for us. You know, we scored one great victory 15 years ago. We didn't listen to Tony Blair. We didn't listen to the big banks. We didn't listen to the big businesses. We didn't join the euro, thank God. Thank God. Now, what is clear is that in economic terms, the north of Europe and the south of Europe cannot live together inside the same economic and monetary union, and that the cultural differences are so great that for the euro to work, either the Greeks have to become like the Germans or the Germans like the Greeks. It ain't going to happen. And the price of this deathlock between the north and the south of Europe is that the north becomes more ever indebted by lending money, by bailouts through central banks and all of these things, and the south gets driven deeper and deeper into poverty and hopelessness. And I think, you know, I know that there's strong feelings in this country about the money that you've been asked to shell out to support the Mediterranean, and I understand that, but I would urge maybe we have just a quiet thought for those poor people in the Mediterranean who on rotten advice from Goldman Sachs, their greedy politicians took them into something that's led them to misery. So for you it's harder. For you it's harder, but I do think that the kindest and best thing post-Brexit will be a more rational analysis of why the South needs to leave the Eurozone. And ultimately your big debate in this country will be about the Eurozone. Because, you know, economically, the Euro is not a problem. You know, you can compete with Germany as a country. It's not a problem. It's just politically, ultimately, you must ask yourselves, do you want to live in an economic and monetary union run by a bank from Frankfurt or govern your own lives? So it won't all be over by Christmas. It'll take a few years, but Brexit will take the whole European project in a completely different and more democratic direction.
Mr. Farage, before I go to the next question, can you please leave Portugal out? I have 6 companies there. The next questions.
Good evening, Mr. Farage.
Good evening.
I seem you did break your leg just now. It was a nice speech. Thanks.
Thank you.
My question is, if you had to and you could, who would you vote for in the upcoming US elections?
That's a hell of a question. Let me just say that there are no circumstances in which I could ever vote for that woman who almost believes she's entitled to the job. There are no circumstances in which I could vote for Hillary Clinton. I find some of the background of White Watergate, etc., you know, really, I'm just amazed that she's still there. From the start, I would have supported Rand Paul. I know Rand. I like Rand. I think his attitude about where America should be in the world and about it being less interventionist militarily would be a very good thing for the futures of all of us. But we finished up with Trump v. Cruz. It looks like Trump's going to win. And whilst Trump puts his finger on some things that do need to be said, I find there is a certain sense of anger about Trump. There is a certain sense of he's only got one gear. And he also seems to believe in a bigger state and has a lot of ideas that I wouldn't necessarily call Republican. There are no circumstances in which I'd vote for Hillary, but if Trump's the nominee, I would genuinely despite he's got, he's saying good things about security, there's much of the rest of his agenda and his manner that I find pretty worrying.
Yeah, me too. Because last week Trump said that women that take an abortion should go to jail. I will never be able to vote for an idiot like that in our Western world. Are we clear on that?
No, I think there are real problems with Trump.
Ja. Dames en heren, wij gaan deze uitzending een beetje afsluiten. Excuse me for speaking Dutch. Heeft the last question. Let it be a good one. The last question. You get the last question. And then we wrap it up and make the answer as short as possible. I don't know if that's possible, Mr.
Right,
Farage.
I'll give you a short answer. He's had enough of me. He wants me gone.
Yeah.
Are you all bored with me? Well, we need a new chairman, don't we? So, come on.
I'm asking why you're not working with Front National and the PVV in the European Union.
Look, I said earlier that this is not about left or right, it's about right or wrong. We all choose to make our own associations. I welcome any party, from the right-wing parties to the Communist Party, that campaigns against the lack of democracy in this union. And frankly, that matters more than who you sit with in the European Parliament, which is a pretty peripheral issue. And incidentally, as a member of the European Parliament, I'm supporting Brexit because I want to be the turkey that votes for Christmas.
Dames en heren, some flowers for Holland. We really appreciate you being here, and it was an excellent speech. But we don't have politicians in Holland that can give us a speech like that, do we?
Well, thank you very much indeed. And I will now spend the next couple of hours mingling, doing photographs, and I'm feeling a bit parched up here. If anyone fancies buying me a beer, the answer is yes. So thank you.
Dames en heren. De laatste woorden, die mag ik spreken. Dat is natuurlijk moeilijk na zo'n prachtige spreker als Nigel Farage. Het enige wat ik kan zeggen, overmorgen stemmen. Dames en heren, dank u wel.